I've been reading this morning about the, I guess, historical, but also contemporary role of imagination. I'm looking at that because I'm just a little bit unhappy with some of the uses that I'm making of the term knowledge and the term metaphor. They're both useful, and I can't not use these terms, and I can't not draw on the bodies of understanding that they refer to. But I'm looking at this term imagination, that concept, and see if I can find a way to enrichen my understanding by thinking about that. One of the things that I found quite interesting when I was reading this morning was in relation to consciousness. Consciousness is really big on the agenda right now. It has been for the last 15 years or so. And I've been to a few conferences on consciousness myself. I've never been to the big one in Tucson yet, although I was invited last year. I couldn't do it. But I have been to a couple of others and done bits of things at various conferences like that. What's sort of interesting about consciousness, well, the fact it's on the agenda at all is interesting and significant, I think. But in terms of the imagination, what I'm finding interesting is that all of the questions that are posed about consciousness, questions like Chalmers' hard problem, for example, or the various competing definitions of consciousness, all those questions, although they're really, really high on the agenda right now, they didn't appear on any agenda at all, it seems, up until about the 17th century. They weren't even on the back burner, as they probably have been here for the last 300 or 400 years, even though they weren't just completely surfaced in consciousness study. It seems that in all of the literature prior to Descartes, really, the idea that they would have this special power called consciousness, or special part of our special faculty, whatever it is, called consciousness, just didn't seem to be around. No one considered the mind-body problem. No one was an eliminative materialist. No one was a panpsychist in the modern understanding of the term. It just doesn't seem to have been around at all. But what I've been looking at this morning was an argument that term that we now, that term consciousness that we now use, all of the functions that term now serves, used to be served, apparently, possibly, by the term imagination. Aristotle wrote about the imagination, and Neo-Aristotelian thought in medieval times dwelt upon this idea of the imagination. And the Neo-Aristotelian medieval concept of it is particularly interesting. They Latinized the Greek term that Aristotle had used for this faculty, if that's what it is. I don't know, I can't remember what the Greek term was, but in medieval times the Latinization was something like sensus communis, which literally would translate as common sense. But it's not common sense how we understand it now. Now, if you use the term common sense, it just means a kind of down-to-earth, robust, no-nonsense kind of attitude. But in medieval times, within the school of thought that I'm thinking, sensus communis, common sense, meant something very different. And it meant that remarkable property of our senses, distinct and independently operating senses, to apparently construct a common, unified world that we experience and live in. Today, in neurological terms, that would be called a binding problem. How the various signals that's being sent from the eyes and the ears and the fingertips, all the sensory organs, somehow manage to be united in this, as I say, this common experience of being that we have. So sensus communis doesn't mean common sense in the modern sense. It means this unified experience. And in that regard, common sense and imagination, in that sense, means what I'm looking at and experiencing right now, including the feeling of this camera phone in my hand. So how does imagination fit into that? I'm not sure, actually, to be honest with you. I guess what's underpinning the idea of imagination there is the sense that, the feeling that, you're not using the metaphorical terms, is the idea that that when I look around the world here, I'm imagining it. I'm constructing an image of it from a disparate sense of uncommon sources and making common sense out of it. And it's an act of constructive imagination, just being alive and awake. It's constructively imagining the world around us. When we use the word imagination now, of course, we tend to use it as a kind of substitute for artistic creativity or fantasy or something like that. And I think I'm right in saying that Aristotle did distinguish his term for imagination with fantasia, although I may be wrong on that one. But certainly our modern understanding of fantasy, or it's like the older understanding of fancy, is not the same thing as the imagination as the Neo-Aristotelians understood it, and how we would currently understand some understanding of consciousness.